By the Grace of Lady Vader, Chapter 5. There was a shimmer over the world when she wore the face shield, a shifting pattern of golden light that reminded her of swimming underwater at the lake near her parents' farm, coming up into the late afternoon sun to a warm hug from her father. The shield was an unattractive contraption. She couldn't imagine how Annie could bear the sight of it, but it did always bring up that brief, pleasant memory. Not that it didn't have its own pleasant memories now, though they weren't quite as innocent. She smiled and ran her hand down the side of Annie's cheek. There had been an instant revulsion the first time she'd seen him, with the deathly pallor of his skin and the permanent rictus of the scarring. But she had resisted the impulse to shrink away, and when his lips had found the hollow of her neck, the place he'd always kissed her first when he planned to seduce her, not that she'd ever needed much seducing. When his breath and his deep and mesmerizing voice stirred across her skin, her nerve endings had recognized him, and she'd burned with the braided flame of passion, tenderness, and love that had written his name on her soul years ago. After a month, she'd needed his kisses, real kisses, not brushes of his lips against her hands, or the touch of his two real fingers on her own mouth, so badly that she'd built the contraption, this Gungan shield that had sparked between them and allowed the touch of his lips on her own, even while they were denied the chance to breathe the same air. His lips moved to the tip of her nose, the flexible shield distorting at his weight and moved against hers. "Alas," he said, "there is little time, my love." "I know, but I'll steal my kisses when I can. It's not quite as easy as slipping into the shadows anymore." He returned her smile as well as he could, then began to reattach the breathing apparatus of the suit. Amidala had learned to replace the mask without the help of medical droids, and she did so with nimble fingers, sparing one last kiss to his poor head before she sealed him away. The floor shuddered beneath them, and Andy's shoulders stiffened. "We've come out of light speed." Amidala didn't comment. She didn't like the tone of his voice. It was the low, dangerous tone that preceded his. The times that he... "We were to approach from the far side of the planet. We are early." A soft tone sounded, and a light flashed beside the chamber controls. Someone was petitioning entrance. It was considered a rare and dangerous task, but Amidala had never actually heard Annie complain about it. At least not any more than any of the other husband would complain, when interrupted from his wife's company. Amidala dashed for the veils, tossing them over her head, shield, mask, and all, as the jaws of the chamber opened. General Veers stood uncertainly in the outer quarters, his hands neatly behind his back. "Lord Vader," he said. "Yes, General." "We've come out of light speed in the Hoth system." The tone grew lower, more dangerous. "Yes?" Veers cleared his throat. "We have found an encampment, but it is heavily fortified and guarded by an energy shield. Aerial bombardment will be impossible." "The rebels are alerted to our presence. Admiral Zell came out of light speed too soon." Amidala's hands went cold. This man had refused to believe the information he had been given. He had questioned Annie's judgment, and now he had committed a strategic error that would cost lives. The twins' lives, possibly. Veers stammered. "Admiral Ozil thought the surprise was..." Annie didn't bother letting him finish the sentence. "He is clumsy as he is stupid." It was a death sentence. Amidala felt her nails digging into the flesh of her hands. She chanced a glance at Veers. His face was pale and stiff. Then she heard Annie's voice in her mind. "He has cost us our children." And that was all. The rage rose in her mind as well. She would not see Leia's eyes again, or touch Luke's hand. Not today. There would be no arguments, no convincing, no alliance. There would only be a bloody battle, and the twins might not be there at the end of it, because Admiral Ozil was clumsy and stupid. Annie activated the view screen to the bridge, ignoring Veers completely. Ozil was leaning over a console, Piet a few steps behind him. Ozil looked up, began giving his report. Some officious-sounding announcement. Then he stopped. His face went red, and he grasped at his throat. Annie looked past him. "Captain Piet?" Piet stepped forward, sparing Ozell a horrified glance. "Yes, my lord." "Prepare for—" Ozell stammered forward, reached out with both hands, and gagged. "My lady Clemency," he gasped in a breath, and Amidala knew that Annie had loosened his grip. She turned to him, glanced at Ozell nervously, then turned back. She was angry. What was it she was meant to do? There was something. Her role was... she was supposed to... An old voice fought its way up, arguing laboriously with the instinctive raw anger that wanted her to wring Ozell's throat himself, and not from a remote location. The voice was calm and cool, like the ocean depths. Her role was not to exact vengeance. Her role was to show the rewards, the advantages of establishing firm control over the galaxy. He was looking at her with his head tipped slightly. "What are your wishes, my lady?" Ozell grabbed at Piet's sleeve. He was breathing, but in great discomfort, then lurched forward towards the transmitter again. "Lady There was little point in killing him now," she said. "The damage is done." "Are you quite certain, my lady?" "Yes, my lord." Annie waved his hand, and Ozell pulled in a noisy breath. "You are an ignoramus, and a coward, Admiral." "Yes." Ozell fell to his knees and vomited. "My lord." "Captain Piet?" Piet looked up again. His eyes had followed Ozell to the floor. "Yes?" "Prepare ground troops and blockade the shipping lane. You are in command now, Admiral Piet." "Yes, my lord," Piet said quietly. He didn't look pleased with his promotion, but he went about his duties. "Ozell," Annie said, his voice rolling like soft thunder that sent in a most inappropriate and inconveniently timed wave of desire through Amidala's heart. Ozell crept forward weeping. "Yes, my lord." "You will accompany General Veers to the surface and participate in the conflict you have necessitated." He returned to Veers. "Assign him to a front-line fighter." "Yes, my lord." Veers disappeared. "We will regret letting him live," Annie said when they were alone. "You have too much compassion." "You didn't need to ask me." He didn't answer that. "He is a liability. He will cost lives." "He sought clemency. Had I refused, I recognize the political necessity, Amidala, but we will come to regret it." "Your Highness, they've assembled." Leia turned and nodded, and the young captain returned to the hangar to await the scheduled briefing, a briefing where she would lay out the plans to send a good number of them to their deaths. Her eyes fluttered shut, and she decided to stay in her small, cold office for a few more minutes to collect her thoughts. She was their leader. She had to focus on other things, such as the fact that this plan was their best, and perhaps only, chance to get the majority of these people off planet. But the small comforts she used to find had grown increasingly elusive. Before there was a necessity, an inevitability about what she was doing, about this fight against the Empire. Now she wondered if these people she was sending to die were quite so willing to give their lives to this cause, or if the cause itself was still quite so noble. What if she were battling her personal demons at the cost of so many people's lives? A loud crash from the hangar snapped her out of her reverie. She knew without asking that it had to be Han or Chewie, trying to get the Falcon off the ground before the attack commenced. Leia was rather angry at Han didn't bother to say goodbye to her, but it didn't matter. What could she have said to him anyway? "Good luck. I'll miss you." Leia shook her head against the thought, against the curious and recurring impulse to just flat out run to Han and bare her soul to him. Ludicrous. He would never understand, and she had never been one to do that anyway. She strode out of her office, careful not to turn in Han's direction as she headed towards the circle of her troops and officers. They were talking in low, suspicious tones to one another. Only a few stopped when they noticed her approach. Leia took her position in the center, stood straight, clasped her hands tightly behind her back, and launched into her orders. All troops except for the attack squadron and the ground personnel will assemble at the north entrance. The transports are authorized to leave as soon as they've been fully boarded. We will send nearly every available fighter out with the transports to give you cover during the evacuation. The remaining fighters will attempt to protect our shield generator on the surface and provide another target for the Empire to center on. The rumbling began again, louder and more insistent. They knew that the few who had volunteered for surface duty were headed for a suicide mission, and the rest of them might not fare much better. Finally, one of them decided to speak up. "They can't protect our generator, and what are our fighters supposed to do against a Star Destroyer?" Leia paced in his direction, ignoring the murmurs of assent that followed the question. "Our ion cannon will provide cover. We only need to buy you some time. After clearing the Imperial fleet, you will immediately head to the rendezvous coordinates." "There aren't just enough of us to do this," grumbled someone in the back she couldn't see. "There won't be half of us that get out of here alive." "And even when we do," said another man, "you know it won't be long before they wind up at the rendezvous. How hard it will be for one of them to follow one of us?" He narrowed his eyes at her. "We won't survive this, and this madness may only be the beginning." Leia felt their eyes on her, accusing, skeptical, frightened. She understood all those emotions were mirrored in her as she stood there before them. "I won't lie to you. We're outnumbered and outgunned. This will be a difficult battle, but don't tell me this effort isn't worth it. I'm not about to sit here and wait to be captured by the Empire. I'm not about to give up just because they think they have caught us. We've fought too hard just to give up, to surrender now. We can escape. We can survive this. But I need you." She turned to all of them. "We need each other." She drew up her shoulders and tightened her hands behind her. "If any of you would rather wait here for certain death, you're welcome to." There was silence. "Then are you ready to fight for our survival?" she urged loudly. A roar came up from the group, not as forceful as she would liked, but a positive sign nonetheless. She dismissed them and watched them try to prepare their ship and themselves for what was about to become. They were staring at him, laughing at him. Maybe not overtly, but he wasn't blind. And he knew what he would have thought if one of those ground troops saw an admiral forced to perform such menial and dangerous duties. Being on the front lines of a rebel assault was not a responsibility that someone of his station should ever have to endure, but was either endure their amusement or return to a certain death at Vader's hand. And he had never heard of someone successfully appealing to her ladyship's sympathy twice, usually because Vader had made sure they didn't get the chance. Was this humiliation worse than death? Azel, away from the immediate danger of having to make that exact determination, couldn't be sure. He had dedicated his adult life to the Empire, part of his adolescence too. The Academy had been the most difficult experience of his life, but he had been proud the day he graduated. It hadn't taken so long for him to climb through the ranks to the position he was in now. He didn't have the benefit of high connections, and knew that he didn't possess a great deal of natural ability, but he had made it anyway. Or so he thought. How would his reputation ever recover from this embarrassment? Would Lord Vader even allow him the chance to do so? Azel sighed angrily at the transport disembarking from the Star Destroyer, bringing the forces down to the surface of Hoth, studiously avoiding the faces of other men. His eyes fell upon the Imperial insignia, the symbol of everything he believed in and fought for. Were the Vaders now the embodiment of that symbol? How could that be? How could the glory of this wondrous galactic empire now be subject to the whims of a woman? A woman! And her subservient husband. It sickened him, and it had before the incident. Azel wondered at times what the Emperor could possibly think of what they were doing. It was an idle thought, but sometimes it consumed him. Surely if the Emperor realized what was happening, he would not stand for it. If only the Emperor knew. He wasn't the only one who felt that way. Before coming aboard the Executor, he had been able to speak a little more freely about his opinion on the Vaders. Not much more, but enough to know that not everyone had fallen under her spell, or given in completely to their fear of the husband. Not that everyone appreciated the gentler face she had put on the Empire, or the popularity and loyalty she wielded. For him, those who thought like him, the Emperor, the secret and shadowy leader that he was, had grown immeasurably, into almost a mythic figure, maybe because he was the only conceivable way to get around, or go above the Vaders. The only real way to take the Empire back out of their clawing hands and return true order and respect to the galaxy. This latest event was simply the last straw for him, to be forced on the bridge in front of everyone to beg for pity from an indifferent woman while her husband insulted him and choked him, and he let the anger roll through and his cheeks burn. In the end, there was nothing to be done about it. He would just have to live through this torment and hope that a better day was coming for him and the Empire. Luke grabbed his helmet and tucked it under his arms, more or less ignoring the piteous glances and sympathetic smiles he got from people as he tried to make his way into his snowspeeder. Under other circumstances, Luke might have found it all amusing, even when he had left to face the Death Star. He hadn't received this kind of treatment. Maybe they had forgotten, but he knew what it really meant to go on a suicide mission, and he didn't think this one was. Sure, they would be badly outnumbered, but whatever kind of ships the Empire sent for ground duty, chances were the rebels would have the faster and more maneuverable crafts. A small advantage, but one that might be enough to give the others the time they needed, and make this battle more than the Imperial target practice many anticipated. Maybe. Luke finally reached his speeder and jumped quickly up the ladder. As he was about to swing into the pilot's chair, he froze. On the co-pilot's chair were Dak's helmet and neatly folded jumpsuit. Luke's shoulders slumped as he threw his own helmet down in an angry grunt. Another desertion. Another one gone. That there was a recognizable custom for an event was disheartening, but Dak wasn't the first person to leave his rebellion gear neatly and conspicuously tucked somewhere that they were supposed to be themselves. Uniforms, weapons, rations, they would be found stacked on beds, in chairs at briefings, on tables in what served as the mess hall. Someone would report the news deserter to Leia. She would order a search be conducted. Nothing would be found, and eventually everyone tried to get back to their routines. It was almost a non-event. Almost. Every person that left took a little more fight out of their spirits, made their work that much harder, made it that much easier for another person to think about leaving. At least there was no evidence yet of any deserter actually turning traitor on them. The rebellion's secrets had essentially remained safe. Luke couldn't imagine what a grievous blow that would be if someone were to give them up to the Empire. Luke sunk into his seat and looked idly to the other co-pilots who were preparing to leave. How convenient it would have been if Leia had somehow confused the flight plan and there was an extra person hanging around to come join him. No such luck. He initialized the engines, put his helmet on, and closed his hands around the controls. For a moment, he tried to call on the Force to center his thoughts and prepare him to go into battle. He saw that he was being waved out of the hangar. It was time to face the Empire. Dak rode into the sharp crystal sky, clutching his Tauntaun's neck and letting her go wherever she would. He had taken his snow gear and his goggles, and they sat heavily on him. He once read a story about a man whose penance was to carry a sun from world to world, its burning weight bowing over him for all eternity. He understood what that would feel like now. The Tauntaun paused, sniffed, and veered. Dak let it. Often in the past, he had looked upon the deserters with contempt. Didn't they have any commitment? He felt no guilt about enjoying Lady Vader's antics because they meant nothing to him. He was a rebel, a member of the Alliance. The fact there was any one Imperial he liked, at least marginally, didn't change that. Those others, obviously, they never really meant it, or were cowards or traitors. The notion of a sudden drowning despair had never occurred to him. He had never felt it, hence, it did not exist. But this morning Dak had begun to feel dizzy? No, not dizzy, but like dizzy. Like he'd been walking across a solid plain, and the ground had suddenly opened. Just a crack, just a glimpse of the endless chasm underneath. The sensation was physical, like 1,000 tiny feather dusters working enthusiastically behind his forehead. There was nothing at all gradual about it. One moment he had been a half-nervous, half-excited young soldier about to go into battle, less listening to Princess Leia than watching her mouth move in the bright snowlight, and imagining touching those shiny lips, just with his finger to see what they felt like if they were what he imagined them to be. Then the panic, the brief realization that she could die today. His own death did not occur to him, and he saw her lying in the snow, her blood soaking her white uniform a deep scarlet, and the gruesome turn of the image had done it. She would be dead in the snow, dead in the scarlet gown spreading in the ice, and Dak saw Lady Vader standing above her, living in scarlet, and the bottom fell out of his world, because he couldn't tell the difference anymore. People die here, people die there, people are kind here, people are kind there. We're all dying and killing, and there's no difference, and who says the Republic was any better? The next moment the world around him had become unreal and unlivable. Sounds were mere echoes in the ice, and he had to concentrate to understand what was being said, as if it were everyone had suddenly started speaking another language. One he knew, but hadn't spoken for many years. He wondered if the others had felt this way. They had dropped out, one after another, and had they taken away the same cover that led over the abyss, unraveled the tarp thread by thread, pulled supports out from under the floor. The last felt right to Dak. He felt that he'd been walking along happily, along a floor that had once been solid, only occasionally annoyed that his friends and partners kept disappearing, and suddenly plunged through the unimagined dungeon. Everything had left his mind except for the need to escape it. "Doesn't matter," he whispered to his tauntaun. "Doesn't matter. One more deserter. War's over." The tauntaun didn't answer him. She just hopped and crested a small rise. The tundra spread out before them, a vast plain beyond the range of the rebel base. In the far western distance he saw the fuzzy sweep of the nightline shadow falling across the world, and he urged the animal toward it. The worst part, all of this, was that it was true. It didn't matter. The war was lost. The others had already deserted, or at least enough to make a dent in the fighting forces, because even if the leaders stayed, you can't fight a war from a control room alone. "Go back." He shook his head. Not possible. He'd already deserted. Luke would have found his things already, and they would have known he was disloyal. They would know what had gone through his mind. He would not be trusted or welcomed, and they might be dead by now. "Then find the Empire. Kneel before Lady Vader and swear allegiance. She always arranges for amnesty." And that wasn't possible either. He thought of his friends, of the people who had died for the rebellion. He couldn't spit on their memory like that. He lifted his head. A fine mist had settled on the inside of his goggles. He took them off thoughtfully, ignoring the blades of ice wind that sliced at his face. They belonged to the rebellion. He shouldn't even have taken them. He tossed them aside and rode on. 10 miles later, he tossed aside the parka as well.